Well, hello and welcome to Shift Left, Transform Your API Security with F5 and Google Cloud. Now, today's exciting webinar is sponsored by Google Cloud and F5 and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm so happy that I get to be your moderator for this conversation today because these more open discussions are such an exciting way to explore a topic. And today, we have two industry leaders here with us to help us dig into all of the complexities and the importance of shifting left as we think about securing your organization's APIs. Now, together, we're going to outline the current threat landscape. We're going to talk about trends and detail how your team can implement those protective tools and processes that you need without impeding the speed of development. That is so important. We have a lot of great content to cover, and our wonderful speakers are waiting here in the wings, ready to get started. So I'm going to zip through just a few housekeeping points that are going to help you get the most out of your time here with us today. All right, as we get started, the very first thing I want to draw your attention on over to the question section of your webinar console. This is the absolute best place to get involved, to get interactive, and to post all of those insightful questions, your comments, your stories, your feedback, your ideas, whatever's rolling around in your head right now. We want to hear from you. So make sure you're using that questions window. In fact, we're going to give it a little test run. Let's try it out. Make sure you're alive, awake, alert, and enthusiastic out there. So give us a hi, give us a hello. Let us know how your day is going. Post something to the community that's here with us today, right there in that questions window. If you haven't already done that, we love to see all of you connecting from around the world. So make sure you get those little highs and hellos in now, and then be sure to be interacting with us throughout the conversation today. We absolutely want to hear from you. Now, a quick side note that questions window is also the best place to reach out and let us know if you do have any technical issues during the session. Knock on wood, of course. But if the little gremlins have got a hold of you today, no problem. The first thing you're going to try is a browser refresh. That usually clears them out. But if they're really clingy today, no problem. If you've got a full gremlin infestation and the browser refresh does not help, you're going to shoot a message there in the questions window, and the Actual Tech Media crew will be there to help you out. All right, the last thing I want to point out as we go through our little guided tour here, we started in the questions window. We're going to head on over to the handouts tab. Be sure that you spend some time checking out those resources and follow-ups. You are going to want to take those away once we wrap up our conversation today. There's going to be a lot coming at you. We're just kind of free-flowing and seeing where this conversation goes. It's going to go to some really cool places, and you will want to revisit some of these points. So make sure that you're spending some time in that handouts tab so that you have those resources ready to rock after we close out our webinar today. Now, it is not just cool content that we have for all of you at the end of our day today. We also have a $250 Amazon gift card that we will be giving away as a prize drawing to someone who is live, present, maybe a little bit lucky here with us at the webinar today. Now, you do need to meet all of the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions in order to win that prize. If you're not sure what those are, again, head back over to that handouts tab that we were just chatting about. Click in, scroll down, and you will find the full T's and C's waiting for you there. All right, well, that is it for housekeeping, my friend. That's all the important information that we need to get through. So let's get into our session. I am so excited to introduce you all to our two incredible guest speakers that we have here with us today. And they are waiting in the wings, ready to talk to all of you. So I'm going to bring them out in just a second. Today, we get to chat with this wonderful dynamic duo. And that is, of course, David Remington, Director of Product Management at F5, and Joshua Hazlitt, a familiar face here, Strategic Technology Partner Manager at Google Cloud. All right, well, Dave and Josh, I know we've got a lot of info to get into. We've got a lot to cover today. So let me get you on out here with me, and we can get that rolling. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being here with us today. Josh, great to see you again. Dave, I'm so excited to hear from you guys today. And I know we have a lot of stuff in store for our incredible audience. I love when we get to have these more kind of conversational discussions where we're slides away and just flowing, just seeing where the day takes us. So I guess let's start with that. Josh, Dave, can I ask you guys to give us a little bit of an introduction and tell us where you are excited for this day to take us? Josh.
You bet, Jess. Thanks for having us back. Really appreciate it. It's good to see everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm joined here by Dave today from F5. I'm the partner manager for the relationship from Google Cloud with F5. And today we're going to take you through some of the exciting advancements we have around API security, some things you should think about, and how can we help you address how you can secure your applications on the platform. So thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's awesome to be here. So, Dave Remington, F5 Networks, and I am product manager in the API security team. So, within F5's distributed cloud, we have an API security solution, and our team is responsible for all of the features and capabilities that we deliver there.
Well, that's perfect, Dave, because APIs are what brings us together today. That's what we're getting into. And I am going to leave the mic with you, Dave, because I actually really want to talk about this F5 2024 State of Application Strategy Report. This is a really important topic. And in the report, it seemed like we were kind of reading that almost, I think, more than a third of organizations are managing as many APIs as they do applications. And in some of those organizations, we're talking about, I mean, north of 10,000 APIs. I mean, just huge numbers of APIs in their environments. And I got to ask, Dave, why this massive growth? Why are we seeing such an uptick in the number of APIs that organizations are managing?
Yeah, sure. No, I think there's a few factors that really sit behind this, right? So, and one of the things that's interesting about the state of the applications report is we have customers big and small, but a lot of the lenses that we have are with larger enterprises, and many of the largest enterprises out there are essentially a little bit behind the curve on API adoption compared to your new startups, you're born in the clouds, you're more small and agile organizations. But we're seeing the largest enterprises take advantage of all that agility that's provided by having reusable services that they can use together. So, a single inventory service that's used in 5 or 6 different mobile applications, for example. API-based application development brings incredible efficiency and agility to organizations. And even these very traditional businesses have started dramatically adopting this methodology, which has essentially been sorted out by the startups, right, and the modern app companies. And so we're seeing a huge jump between 2020 and 2024. We saw the number of organizations who have more API-based apps than legacy apps go from about 24% to almost 51%. Right. So that means that the average organization now has more API-based applications than legacy. And we only see that trend extending because of what can be done to deliver business value so fast. And of course, this is creating all this complexity because not only are you building a bunch more APIs, but because they're reusable, it's sometimes very hard for a security team to understand which customer-facing applications are using which APIs in their infrastructure. And it creates a very sort of a ball of fire or a bewildering web of interactions that can be really hard to wrap your arms around from a security perspective.
Those are great points, Dave. And you're so right. I mean, the reality is that as we see this transition where you've had the born in the cloud companies really lean in, with only API built applications. And now you're starting to see the transformation of enterprises move in that direction. I think there's kind of 3 key areas where we're seeing enterprise adoption really start to make this transition. And the first of that is, of course, cloud computing. So using, cloud service providers really is all about how do you get your applications out of your on-prem or your data center, and you start to take a look at how are they architected and what are the application stacks you're using. And there are lots of innovation opportunities when you get to the cloud. So we're seeing this shift towards microservice architectures, right, where you can bundle together applications as a collection of smaller independent services, and then also leverage third-party services that you can tuck into your application just to provide a much more rich experience. And so that means that there's a wider prevalence of not only the native organic APIs that are being used, but what are those external third-party APIs that can come into the mix? And then, of course, mobile devices, right? I think there's nobody that doesn't have, at this point, multiple screens in front of them. And as we have had that proliferation of mobile devices, that's led to a massive surge in demand for mobile applications, which are all based upon APIs, with connecting to backend services, databases, authentication, and of course, payment gateways as a key example. So yeah, APIs are they're here to stay. And as Dave mentioned in the report, it's just going to continue to transition to API first type strategies.
Josh, I got an image in my head of like organic APIs. It's like organic avocados and like the whole food section. There's the pricey, fancy, all natural organic APIs. Dave, I actually really want to come back to, and I'm going to bring us around again in a little bit here to kind of the web you were describing and all the different knots, because I think that is an important part of the discussion we need to have, that kind of security element of how do you begin to untangle and trace all of these different knots. But before we get into that, I'm wondering, you've both given us a lot of context into why this trend and we're seeing this rapid growth. Is that going to, from 20 to 24, and I think you kind of alluded to this, Dave, that you do anticipate this continuing on from 2024. Why are you feeling so certain that this trend is going to continue growing? And do you think it's going to be that same sort of rapid growth, or how are we going to see that?
Well, I actually think it's accelerating, because if you extend and you look before 2020, you had a fairly flat amount of growth. I mean, it was growing a little bit every year, and then we've really seen a hockey stick the last few years. And the reason why, and I'm glad that Josh brought up the concept of the APIs that an organization consumes. The best way to interact with someone's microservice-based application is with your own microservice-based application. And as all of these services, these third-party services, or these infrastructure as a service or platform or SaaS, are all being built to deliver based on APIs, when you incorporate those into your business strategy or your security strategy or whatever, you need to build services to interact with them. So unless everybody decides one day that APIs aren't cool anymore, this is going to be a self-reinforcing pattern, where not only does a business want to use APIs because they deliver value faster, but they're also going to need to use APIs because that's the way that they're going to best be able to consume functions that are not part of their core competencies that they choose to purchase from a partner.
It's a great point, Dave. And I think one of the key emerging areas where we see that as far as consuming external services is around AI, which is becoming more widespread. And of course, I think it's all the rage right now. If we look at the hype cycles in each of the verticals, we're seeing use cases from chatbots to the way that I can analyze my data quickly, to being able to provide net new services that you couldn't do before for not only your end users, but for your internal constituents as well, the folks that work inside your organization. So we're going to continue to see that rapid growth because not only can we use AI now as an API endpoint, but AI can help us to actually develop code around how to make APIs more efficient, more effective. And Dave, to your point, right, organizations have to think about how can they then create their own microservices architectures. Well, AI can help you now code more quickly and use better best practices around that. I think the other piece then is around, how do you do application delivery faster? And of course, AI can also help you with testing and validation of those APIs to ensure that they function as intended. And then also, help you to identify bugs and vulnerabilities early in the development cycle. So more of that shift left strategy around how do I make sure that what I'm releasing as code is more secure than before. And then that, of course, gets you to faster, release cycles and more efficient deployment across the organization.
That's a perfect segue, Josh, to where I want to go next, because we can't continue this conversation without stopping to talk about security, because we've been hitting on the speed of growth, right? And a lot of times when we see any industry, any tool, any resource, any trend that has that rapid growth, rapid acceleration, sometimes security gets left behind, and we outpace what we're ready to protect. So I'm wondering, are we in a place where we've been able to keep up with this growth, or Dave, how would you describe our current state of API security as it stands right now?
So on a previous webinar, I said that it was not great, and I think we're still in a kind of not great state, but I'd say that the awareness is much higher even than a year ago. and certainly more than 4 or 5 years ago, that understanding your API inventory and having an end-to-end strategy that starts when you begin your development of the API all the way to production and even on into retirement, or versioning, right? All of that has to be taken into consideration from a security perspective. And you said that, sometimes we do things without thinking about security. I think you could double down on that. The human behavior that we have seen over and over and over again is to come up with something cool and then start figuring out all of the negative implications and how we protect ourselves from it, right? We didn't need streetlights until we had cars. So I'd say that that's just a pattern that we have to understand. And APIs, thankfully, we have pretty good answers for most of the challenges that people have with their APIs today. And organizations are building good strategies. More and more, we see many more organizations are not just being reactive, but proactive about building an API security strategy. And so now we have AI coming along, and we have no idea how to secure that either. So that's going to be our next challenge. Is we've got this new thing, and we're going to go through the same cycle, right?
That's true. I think we're seeing new threats emerge that we didn't have before, and we're going to have to figure out how do we use AI to protect against AI in effect, and against bad actors in these new areas. I think one of the other ways that we can leverage AI, though, to for good, is it can help analyze API usage patterns, right? So the organizations can become more intelligent about which APIs are being used in the environment, have the insights from that data, and then make sure that they're putting the right protections in place. And how do you optimize deployment and control of those? I think Dave mentioned a good point, which is having an inventory, visibility, some of those key components come into place of how do we make sure that we're putting some governance around what we do with APIs in our organizations. And that's kind of the first place to start.
Okay, so obviously there's some steps that we could take. And Dave, I'm going to put you back on the hot spot because you said we're not great. We're getting like a C plus maybe for
B minus.
B minus. Great, thank you. Just inching us up a little bit into that gold star range. So, okay, if we're at that B minus rate and we're really itching for that A, what do you think is missing? What is keeping us from getting to that A plus standard for API security?
Yeah, so one of the things that we see, thankfully, we in our state of the application report, organizations reported that overwhelmingly they've adopted API gateways as the primary way to control access to their APIs, and that's good. But you still have to use the API gateway properly. And one of the biggest challenges to API security is just authentication. Have some sort of authentication in front of your APIs. Because if you do not identify the user, you don't have a great way to understand if their usage patterns are legitimate or illegitimate. You are basically giving any arbitrary attacker free rein to play with your APIs as much as they want to find vulnerabilities. So step one is don't just deploy API gateways, but leverage the authentication mechanisms to make sure that every API that you publish, as much as possible, unless there's a vital business reason why it should not be authenticated, every API should be authenticated. And if you start there, you're going to dramatically reduce the ability of hostile actors to start probing your APIs for vulnerabilities and just perpetrate whatever shenanigans they want to, because you have no control.
Solid use of the word shenanigans. I've also gotten really into the word rigmarole lately. I feel like shenanigans and rigmarole underutilized in our conversation. So I'm going to see if I can slip that into this conversation later. But okay, in all seriousness, if unmanaged APIs are a risk and we're seeing that and identifying that more and more as a risk, what is the threat? Why are they so bad, so dangerous to organizations? And why should that be on everyone in the audience today? Why should unmanaged API be part of their kind of to-do and concern list?
So I'll start off, and then I'm sure Josh will have some great wisdom to add. Um, Organizations have a variety of different types of unmanaged APIs. And the vast majority of customers that we talk to understand, they know that they don't know everything, right? A few do and they're wrong, and a few do and they're actually right. But it's very typical for organizations, and that partly that's because of mindset. Um, if it's low priority, do I need to get security operations involved? If it competes with a business imperative, do I get a get out of jail free card to publish my APIs the way I want to instead of going through centralized governments because I've got to get this, capability to market super fast? Am I publishing APIs using third-party software in my domain space? Maybe I have some sort of workflow tool or some sort of uh, 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 communication tool that I'm publishing under mycompany.com. You're responsible reputationally, and potentially you've got sensitive information. You've probably got specific user credentials and so on that are associated with that third party, but the security team may not be mandated to secure it. So you really have to look for both the unmanaged APIs, even if they're not APIs that you develop as an organization, right? And then you have to look for these, oh, it's not very important, so we're just going to put it off on the side. It's just an API we popped up for our company event. Well, guess what? That they may have popped that up for the company event, but it may be tied into your main HR database to know who's supposed to be using the app or to populate the names when you start to chat in the chat function, right? So you need to be able to find all of these unmanaged APIs because you cannot understand if they're carrying sensitive information. You cannot understand if they're properly authenticated. You cannot understand if they're, patched and free of serious vulnerabilities until you bring it under governance. And this is really actually a struggle that many organizations are having a challenge grappling with, just because of the pace of business, acquisitions, all these things happen so fast, and so really they're tools. They're either techniques or strategies, products or tools that can help you find these things, right? You don't have to use my stuff, but you use something to find all your APIs. Start getting your arms wrapped around it.
The HR example gave me chills, Dave.
Same. Yeah, literally, yes.
Not good, not good. APIs are here to stay. They for sure are critical to application development and the way that we're leveraging the internet and mobile devices and everything else today. Especially AI. But I think the reason that they're to get back to your question, Jess, the reason they're dangerous is that they expose application logic and sensitive data to the outside world, right? Like the HR system that Dave brought up. Which just creates a larger attack surface for potential breaches with the prevalence of APIs. And then I think each API endpoint represents a potential entry point for malicious actors. And then of course you've got issues around what kind of data sits behind that. Could be PII, financial, and if not properly secured, right, you've got potential data exposure and massive breach potential. So you just have to be aware that APIs are how we're communicating. It's where the data resides, and it's how you're gaining access into different applications. And that access, if not properly protected, could go unchecked and unmitigated.
Every time we have a conversation with this Google Cloud F5, it is A, super fun. And then B, there's a moment where I get those little chills, there's always the scary point where everything's just, you're learning all these things, and it's like learning about phishing attacks where you need to learn about them, but you also kind of don't want to know, but you also need to know. And so I feel like we've hit that point. I also got the little goosebumps, and just realizing how easy that is, how easily that can happen. And that's a scary place to be. We've learned enough now that I'm in the fear zone of our conversation. And I would like to take it now to our happy place. I'd like to start moving towards how we start finding solutions solutions. And Dave, I told you I was going to bring it back around to this, this sort of, I always, for some reason, it's always red threads in my mind. APIs are red threads. So I'm picturing a web of red threads, and they're all tied in little bows, and they're shooting in 3 dimensions in all different directions. And that is a very scary thing to think about securing. We understand how dangerous it can be to not secure it. So this is very important. Dave, give us some hope, give us some action steps. How can an organization start to trace those threads and start to find shadow APIs within their environment?
Yeah, sure. So just by way of definition, a shadow API is an API that's available for consumption that is undocumented and or unmanaged. And when we talk about finding shadow APIs, we really think that the first step is to examine your exposed domain space. And there are a variety of different products and tools. We have a tool that will help you do this, but there's a variety of different ways that you can go and look and say, what are all of the applications in mycompany.com and inside, splat.mycompany.com, how many unique FQDNs and all those FQDNs, where are the API endpoints? Because that's my exposed threat surface, right? It's not all my APIs, and I've still got a bunch of internal APIs that could very well be implicated and even exploited from the outside. But I need to start by what are the entry points, right? And then at the same time, the other thing we need to do is, at least in the applications that our organization is developing, right? We need to have rigor around properly documenting those APIs, right? It should be integrated into the CI/CD pipeline. It should be a process that happens automatically, so that anytime I make a code commit to an API, I have new, current, accurate documentation that is built ideally both with an eye to making sure people that read the schema know how they're supposed to interact with the API, but also constrained or hardened in a way that it is not overly permissive, and therefore allows a lot of opportunity for tampering with, finding boundary conditions in the API where you can, send unanticipated input and get interesting behavior out of it. So I'd say that's really, it's almost always all the way on the right? Look at the stuff that's in production, find all of that, but also start adding rigor into your API documentation. And if you're doing that as a manual process, you're not going to be able to keep up with business. It's going to fall behind. So it needs to be an automated process that's integrated into your full app dev pipeline.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because we talked about that speed being so vital to all of this. And you gave a great example earlier of what happens when you have a business need that, it has to happen right now. And so that urgency is really putting pressure. So I think that's a great kind of 1-2 punch, is having documented and understood processes so that that flow chart, what, when you can circumnavigate and how, and you're documenting that. And then also ideally having things happen as quickly as possible, so that you may not even have to make that decision about, ideally you're not slowing down the process for that business growth. But that documentation point, I think that's so key, regardless of how that kind of works or operates with an organization, is being able to go back through and see, because you keep mentioning, Dave, this sort of idea of wrapping your arms around it. And that's hard to do if you can't see, it's hard to do if you don't know what's there. Which I think, speaking of that, when we're looking at these environments, not only are we talking about all these different applications and all the APIs, we're also talking about these multi-layered and complex IT environments as a whole. And I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of insight into, for an organization that might be in a situation with multi-cloud, how that sort of environment and infrastructure might change some of the conversation. Is it actually making things more complex, or not at all? What do you think, Dave?
It's making things incredibly complex, because organizations find themselves in a multi-cloud scenario. And by the way, when we survey, we find that more organizations are multi-cloud than not. 70, 80% of organizations that are using cloud are using more than one. And if you stretch your definition of cloud to include SaaS, it's everybody, right? But if you're just talking about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service type clouds, and also if you're also taking into consideration private cloud, most organizations have not moved everything out of the data center. right? They moved some, and some of them have taken some back, and some of them kept moving more, but almost nobody is completely out of their data centers. And the other way you end up in multi-cloud is because there's a very important reason, a technical reason, or a business reason, or just an organizational reason. We acquired this company; they're using a different cloud. We want to standardize it, but until we can standardize it, we've got to deal with this multi-cloud scenario. And so it's, I'd say it's a problem for most organizations, and it's something that poses some, let's just say, devil's choices, because all of these clouds provide a variety of security functions, if we want to look at this from a security perspective, right? So I have to decide, how am I going to attract and maintain all of the expertise necessary for every single cloud that I have critical business function in, right? I've got applications over here, over there, all these different clouds. I've got stuff in my own private cloud. My private cloud's protected probably by my traditional perimeter stack, which is completely different from all of the different capabilities in each cloud. And so what an organization has to do is they have to be very intentional to pick and choose which functions are delivered by specific clouds, and where should I have something that layers in front of it to function as a gateway, or to function as a WAF, or to function as a API discovery or API security tool, right? And where are things that are so, that are not super complicated, that maybe I do figure out how to do, maybe the networking or the firewall rules, and I use the native clouds in each cloud for that. And these choices are not easy, right? And the answer of let's be an expert in everything is not practical. So we have to figure out how we can use tools, how we can use SaaS products, how we can use the platforms to our best of our ability. Because if we don't, what we've got is chaos, and we've got a need for a whole bunch of people that don't really exist, because there's nobody that's an expert on all these, right?
And we're back to the scary place. Great. No, Dave, this is okay. But actually, I want you to keep going with where you were just kind of at, because earlier you mentioned AI maybe coming in and automations helping to be a part of this solution. Because if we've got APIs being added constantly, if that hockey stick kind of continues for us and growth kind of continues, so security teams are needing to be constantly building that awareness. And I'm wondering, is AI the answer for that, or are they going to be able to keep up with this kind of vigilance that is going to be needed? What do you think, Dave?
AI is going to be vital. People just can't. People can't invent answers fast enough. You can use the analogy of writing some sort of IPS or WAF signature to block stuff. Well, if the other side is an AI constantly chewing on data and picking options and coming up with exploits, and on the other side is a smart person, the smart person's toast. I don't care how smart they are. So we have to leverage AI just so that we can get that mass effect and that big data effect. But the good news is there's already lots of different organizations that are coming up with really, really clever ways to use AI to make things better. Josh mentioned leveraging AI to write better code. Hey, we talked about code security is really where it all starts. If you start with better code, you've got much less threat surface, right? I can also leverage AI to make the tools that I need to use easier to use, because instead of doing all the configuration, perhaps I could just type a plain language thing that says deploy a medium security policy in front of these applications, and maybe the AI can be taught to be clever enough to do that effectively. So I think there's massive potential for AI, not just in the traditional sense that we've thought about, which is like I'm going to use machine learning to identify vulnerabilities, anomalies, and put a mitigation in place, right? We kind of all understand that that's a very valid use of AI. But use of AI to keep the vulnerabilities from ever happening, or to make it easier for a security administrator to do remediation or to do threat hunting. All of these applications are actually super exciting. And we're going to need them also because not only do we have to think of AI as an adversary, we also have to think of AI as a risk, right? And so when you're dealing with tons of data, it's very difficult to have static rules that sit in front of your chatbot that tells you what you can and can't do. A great analogy is you say, hey, you can't type these 5 keywords in, and somebody takes a photo of those 5 keywords and submits them to the LLM. It's clever enough to convert the picture into text, and you're in. I mean, that's a simplistic example, but you can see how creative people are getting around static rules. So we have to be really thoughtful about how we also protect all the data that's in these AIs, right? And honestly, the only way that we're going to be able to do that is something that can, on the fly, analyze the conversation that's happening and identify that it's anomalous and dangerous.
Yeah, Dave, I'd like to pull in that, that thread of using AI to defend against, the threats that we're seeing. And I think, to your point, we're seeing partners like yourselves, like F5 and our customers start to leverage AI to detect and prevent against security threats, right? It can just move faster. It can detect anomalous behavior. It can, take a look at, basically metered bounds that are going above and beyond what we would expect as normal usage. And these are all things that we can use as pattern detection. But then, also if we are looking for things like unauthorized access attempts, so you take your ACLs and based upon where, a API call may be originating, and then, is it normal for you to, get a mass amount of requests against that IP address, or, there's ways of taking a look at how can you identify malicious activity and then shut that down proactively. And then, by analyzing those patterns, of course, right, get in front of those vulnerabilities, and then at the same time, work on how do you get that back into the DevSecOps lifecycle so that you can get ahead of how do we prevent these from occurring in the future if we put the right protections in place. So, I think, we've arrived at a time where leveraging AI to defend against AI is going to become a real thing.
Well, and let's keep rolling with that conversation around DevSecOps, because a lot of what you've both mentioned is, using AI to prevent AI and also augment AI, and it just AI, it's the little snake eating its tail. It's just AI everywhere. So this is great, but you've also both mentioned that there's a human side of this, that, we need to have your teams that are coaching the AI and training the AI and, helping to implement and then checking and iterating. And because obviously this is an ongoing process and nothing is static with all of this. So there's a lot of human element to this, right? And so when we're trying to build out our teams and create these really effective security teams, historically, there has been a little bit of tension between developers and security, between those kind of two sides of it. And DevSecOps was one of the ways that we sort of approached that. Josh, since you were kind of hitting on that, maybe I'll throw this back to you. Can you talk about, is this still an issue? Is this still something that we're seeing? And if so, how do we sort of ease some of that tension between these two really important teams?
Yeah, you bet, Jess. I appreciate the question. And I think I forget it was you or Dave that earlier on in the conversation here introduced this concept of when something bright, new, shiny comes on, the forefront, we want to move to start using it and figure out what can be done with it. Sort of like what we're doing with AI today with Gen AI. But the reality is the security conversation tends to lag a little bit behind what the development and sandboxing of the new technology, becomes. So I think the important component here is you've got to think about, as we engage in new either moving to microservices architectures, embracing CSPs, whatever the case might be, as far as your API journey is concerned, you really have to integrate security practices early in the software development lifecycle. And so what that does is it brings your security team into the table with your DevOps team to think about how do we design and architect the right way to protect against some of the new solutions we're putting in place. And so that, then turns into this review cycle of how do we take a look at the architecture reviews, threat modeling, code reviews to make sure that the right security practices are being implemented as we develop new code. And I think you have to encourage both teams really to take ownership security outcomes. I mean, developers, tend to run headlong into, I think Dave mentioned this, shipping a feature or shipping a solution because they're kind of measured on that, uh, new way of getting application delivery quickly. But they also need to be responsible for writing secure code. And I think if you do the cross education between the teams early on and you set the expectation of how are you going to validate the code once released, I think that then brings everybody into this idea of we all have responsibility for delivering safe code. And then hopefully that puts the organization in a cadence of we know what it could looks like, and we know how to make sure that we're checking what we expect to happen.
I really appreciate that sort of almost change management style approach to how we talk about security, and from that human element that this always comes back to is really making sure that the entire organization, really, I mean all teams, but everyone should feel like they have a hand in that security for an organization, that they're a part of that in some way. There really shouldn't be anyone in an organization that doesn't feel like they're connected to that. Maybe some a little bit more on the front lines than others, but everyone really kind of being a part of that. And I think that training and that conversation is so important. That is one really key element. You guys have also given us some tips around, again, looking at AI implementations and automations. We've talked a little bit about like getting that visibility and all the different tools and things that can help with this. So there's a lot of great places to start to kind of looking at API or building a more robust API security program. Josh, I'm going to ask you to give us a step one in case anyone is maybe feeling like, okay, these are all great and I'm a little overwhelmed and what do I do to get started? What is the first step towards improving your API security that you would suggest to the audience?
You bet. I'll share my thoughts on it, but I'm sure Dave's got some good ideas too. So I think talking about this cross culture understanding of how do we put some change process or change management in place, I think really what that comes down to is putting the right governance structure. As you start to think about how do we make sure that we're improving our API security and code delivery. And so I think the first thing is some of the things that Dave's brought up are identify your landscape, right? Understand the existing APIs that you have in your environment. Understand where you may have shadow APIs that you need to get under control. Then go through the process of documentation. I think, Jess, you double clicked on this, but documenting each API's purpose, its functionality, security measures, and best practices for deployment and maintenance is a really important component. And then assessing the risks that you have in your organization. What vulnerabilities do exist based upon each API? What data resides behind it? And how do you make sure that you've safeguarded those? And then make sure that you're prioritizing, what APIs you're focused on from potential impact. And then, take a look at how is the usage of that in your environment. So really have the right tools in place to make sure that you can see the APIs and you can understand what usage is occurring against them.
Right. And, just to riff on that, that's great points. And actually, as I was thinking earlier, Jess, when we were talking about the previous subject as well, developers do not want to write bad code. They don't want to deploy unsecure applications, right? They need to be empowered, but more importantly, they need to not be impeded from implementing securely. And so what we need to do, if you want to say what's the high level rule we should try to set for ourselves, the goal of an organization that wants to secure these modern applications should be to make the right way the easy way, right? And making it the easy way implies that you have, just like you have reusable application services, you should develop reusable security services. Right? And you should be leveraging a platform that is a modern platform. If you're trying to secure modern applications with, old-fashioned log into the GUI or log into the CLI security tools, you've already lost. So you need to be able to fully automate these reusable security services so that the developer, when things are deployed, the apparatus automatically attaches the right security policy in the right places, right? And now I have something that the developer can consume easily that happens to be doing it the right way.
I love that. Dave, you've now given me goosebumps twice. The first one was the scary kind. This was the good kind. I love making the right way, the easy way. I think that is such an impactful statement, and I hope that's something that kind of resonates and sticks with people. It seems like common sense, but I think I think a lot of times we move away from that. So I think that's a really wonderful takeaway for everyone out there. And we're speaking of the folks here with us. We have some great questions coming in from the audience, and I want to make sure that we leave time for them. And we're getting close to the end of time, but I'm going to sneak in one last question before we get into some audience questions. I want to talk a little bit about bot prevention. I think that's something that we haven't gotten to as much in this conversation. So if we're talking about the rapid growth and the prevalence of API, what is the effect of bot prevention? If we're seeing that become a little bit more difficult, then how are we going to be thinking about API and bot mitigation possibly together, or maybe in a more holistic view, instead of, I think, previously where we've taken them as kind of two separate disciplines. So our theme today is sort of bringing things together. So Dave, and then maybe Josh, if you want to chime in on how we're bringing a kumbaya of API and bot mitigation.
Sure. Right. So, if we look in the Wayback Machine, right, and we think about what bot protection is, bot protection in a variety of different manifestations was basically, I'm going to try to determine if the person that's using this application is a real human or not, right? So I may use client-side inspections, I may use anomaly detections, I may use patterns of behavior, rates of access, all these kinds of things. And if I feel like that I'm suspicious, then I use something that only a human should be able to solve. For example, a CAPTCHA is a great example of that. And we've made CAPTCHAs better and better. Now, unfortunately, AIs are really good at solving CAPTCHAs, so we're probably going to have to iterate again. But that was our strategy. Are you a human? If not, go away. Well, more and more and more of the API traffic is coming from other services. So this is machine-to-machine communication. So you lose the ability to have very much understanding of client-side context, and you also lose the ability to interact with that service. Right? You can't throw a CAPTCHA up and have the other service on the other end somehow solve it. Because if they're good, the bad guys could solve it too, right? So we have to leverage more sophisticated mechanisms to detect the anomalies in the API traffic itself, so that we can detect things like iteration through an inventory for scraping purposes, or simply just an account takeover attempt where somebody's submitting credentials over and over and over, right? And we could put simple mechanisms in place to reduce that threat. You should rate limit your logins, for example. But actually cleverly identifying who's the attacker and not really requires us to have another level of sophistication in how we observe the traffic and find these anomalies, right? At F5, we use a lot of machine learning and AI to do these kinds of detections to protect the APIs. But even then, you can still also leverage all the old techniques, right? For your mobile apps, you can build security into the mobile apps so that your APIs have a trusted relationship and they know that they're talking to a secure version and a legitimate version of the app. You can use strong authentication. You can detect people that are spoofing browsers and things like that. All of those things should still be done, but you need to have another level of sophistication besides just, hey, I just received over 100 requests per second from this one IP address. Let's throw a CAPTCHA up. That can't be our bot mitigation for these machine-to-machine applications.
And Dave, what I hear you saying is that the techniques that have been employed in the past are going to get more sophisticated. And so we're going to have to think about how do we get more sophisticated when it comes to anomaly detection, defense, and then, making sure that we're validating that we've got a legitimate user accessing the APIs.
Right. Right. Because for a machine-to-machine communication, the legitimate client is in fact a bot. It's just a bot that happens to be trying to do business with you in a legitimate way, right? So let's not block them. Let's keep those transactions rolling, but be really clever about finding the anomalies.
Yeah, makes sense.
Be really clever. That's our key takeaway from this webinar. I do, Josh, before I'm going to get into some audience questions. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add with bot mitigation?
No, I think Dave captured it really well. And I think the important thing is it's you have to address both. You can't just take one at this point, right? We need to think about how are we doing both in conjunction and have a consolidated strategy for bot and API security.
Well, that's a lot of what we're chatting about today, is how to get these consolidated strategies and taking things, making things whole, multiple teams and bots and APIs. It's all a big happy family here. Speaking of happy family, we've got some awesome audience members out there with us today that have some questions for you guys. I know we have a little bit less than 10 minutes. Dave and Josh, I think we can cram in a few questions and answers.
You bet, Jess. Happy to help.
Let's do it. Okay, I'm going to start with this one because I think this is a good one, and we've kind of brushed along those shadow APIs today. So we have an audience member wondering, how do I actually know if I have shadow APIs in my environment? Dave, do you maybe want to kick us off on that one?
Sure. Well, I can just say you probably do. But
yes, done.
No, the way that you can know that you have shadow APIs in your environment is you need to be able to compare your documentation to what is seen in production environment. Whether you're discerning what's in production by doing some sort of scanning and testing, or whether you've got a tool that's watching the traffic, or and identifying things that are not in inventory, you have to be comparing reality to your documented inventory, right? And the second way that you can know that you probably have shadow APIs is examining how you handle versioning. If I see a bunch of API calls that say blah, blah, blah /v3/blah, I can almost guarantee that there's a /v2. I can almost guarantee that it's not patched, right? Because that's why we have v3. And probably I don't need it anymore. Or maybe I only needed it for a little while we transitioned all the clients, but it's likely still out there. So think about also not just the scan and compare documentation to reality, but also think about your practices, especially around versioning of APIs, because that tends to be a big gap where old vulnerable endpoints linger around because nobody shut them off.
All right. Well, Dave, I'll send this one to you again as well. Question, how does API security differ from a web application firewall?
Okay, that's a great question. And actually, there's kind of a debate. Is a lot of API protection just a really smart WAF with more advanced techniques? Or if we add these techniques and the platform happens to be a WAF, does it suddenly become something else? But fundamentally, when we think about what a web application firewall traditionally does, is it's typically trying to discern between known good traffic and known bad traffic, and blocking the known bad traffic. And then providing mechanisms to do point in time, maybe with some context, mediation on suspicious traffic. We don't know whether it's good or bad, and we want to figure out how to categorize it, right? So WAF is a very runtime focused technology, and it's very, if it's got a memory, its memory is fairly short. It's the duration of the web session. Application security is very similar to that in many ways, because we need to be looking at the runtime, and we need to be parsing the API protocols, and we need to be looking inside them for malicious injection attacks or whatever. We need to be doing all these things, but the challenge with API security is really more around the governance element, which is really a data problem. It's not so much a traffic problem. It's really a data problem. Like, where are all my APIs? How do they behave? How can I understand where there are vulnerabilities? And the other thing that's really different about APIs is that most of the most dangerous attacks are logic-based attacks, like manipulation of broken authentication or broken authorization, right? There's 2 or 3 of the top 10 that are just all around. You don't have authentication and authorization done properly, right? So those require the ability to find patterns over time, maybe over a long period of time, that indicate a client that is behaving in a malicious fashion, even though every single thing that they do during that malicious action is technically legitimate, right? And so that pattern detection is really where you leave what we normally think of as the WAF space and get into the API security space. And also this whole notion that we've got to wrap ourselves around the inventory and the data component of API security, so we can find them all, make sure they're documented, et cetera. That's really where we differentiate. Now, they're kind of peas and carrots. You should probably be using both, because you can still do SQL injection attacks against APIs, right? So let's block those.
I like it. All right. Well, Dave, thank you. Those were 2 great answers. Josh, I think this next one is going to be for you. And this is probably going to have to be our last audience question because we are right at the edge of time here. Josh, question here. Can I use Apigee outside of Google Cloud?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. So let me level set first of all and make sure everybody knows what Apigee is. It's an API management platform that Google Cloud offers, and it helps organizations really build, manage, and secure APIs. And we partner with F5 on, using Apigee with F5 solutions as well. So it's a good way for customers to be able to, leverage both solutions. So question being, can you use it outside of Google Cloud? Well, certainly. You can deploy it for APIs that you may build for your applications in Google Cloud, but it also has a hybrid setup to where it can go into another CSP or even onto prem as necessary. So you can leverage it to do full lifecycle management of your APIs, no matter where they reside.
Perfect. Nice and easy. Okay, you managed to get it in under time. Well done, Josh. You're a pro. Dave, I'm going to kick it back to you one last time, but this one is an easy one. I have a question for you myself, Dave. For somebody out there that is really excited, wants to learn a little bit more, is feeling pumped up and all goosebumpy after this incredible conversation that we've had and wants to dig in a bit further, what is your recommended next step to learning a little bit more or kind of taking some action after we wrap here?
Thanks, Jess. So, actually, we've got a pretty great opportunity today because our guests, our viewers, can look in the handouts tab and find information on how they can set up a Meet the Expert session with F5 and Google experts. So check the handouts section and you can get access to people that are, super smart about all of this stuff. It might be Josh or I, it might be somebody probably way smarter than me that'll jump on and help you with your challenges.
As a special bonus treat to all of you out there in the audience, you win the chance to have a conversation with Dave and Josh, and that is the best prize I could think of. Every conversation with you guys is so fascinating. I know I've learned so much from this conversation. As always, I hate seeing that time tick near the end of our webinars always, because I could always keep these conversations rolling. But you know what? We'll just have to have you back again soon. So to both of you, thank you so much for being here with us today. This has been an absolute blast.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. It's been awesome to be here with Google.
All right, now, if having a super cool follow-up conversation with Dave and Josh was not enough of an incentive, although it really should be, because come on, that's just a pretty cool giveaway. We have a special little bonus prize for all of you. So all you have to do in order to get this bright, shiny Yeti French press, which who doesn't want that? Ooh la la. All you have to do is head to the handouts tab, click on that link, book that meeting with an expert, have that wonderful, incredible meeting with the expert, gain all of the cool insights that are going to come out of that conversation, and then voila, you get a French press. I don't know why I'm feeling French today. I'm feeling very je ne sais quoi. You'll get a lovely French press from Yeti delivered to you. So again, you get that expert meeting, you get all that cool insight, and bonus French press. pretty cool. So make sure you clicked on the link, make sure you open that up, and make sure you get that conversation rolling. Speaking of cool prize giveaways, we have one more prize giveaway for all of you out there, and that is a $250 Amazon gift card going to someone who is here, live, present, and just a little bit lucky at the webinar with us today. And that special somebody is Scott Banning from California. Scott Banning from California, congratulations. You have won a $250 Amazon gift card, and we will follow up with you after we wrap up our webinar, which, my friends, is right now, because here we are at the end of our time together. And I want to once again say a big thank you on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team to F5 and to Google Cloud for making this webinar possible, especially to our incredible speakers here with us today, Dave and Josh. You have given us so much to think about, as always. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and a big part of that is all of you out there, all of you in the audience who asked great questions, who participated in our discussion today, or even just by joining in and adding your good vibes through the internet here, and we can all be a part of this together. And that really is the best part of these webinars. I meant it at the start when I said that these are my favorite style of webinars. I love when we get to kind of put the slides aside and leave the scripts behind and just really see where the interest takes us, where the flow takes us, what you are all interested in learning more about, what the experts are interested in digging into. And that is such an exciting way to kind of explore and pick apart these ideas together, to pool our knowledge, our information, our resources, and to collaborate as we move forward through to some solutions, which I think we all got to today, which is, of course, the most exciting part of all of this, is seeing where we all go next, right? And where you take this information in your organizations and in your teams. So I'm very excited to see where you all go. I hope your brains are just feeling absolutely full with cool insight. I know mine is. And I cannot wait to see you all at a webinar again soon. Until then, I hope you all have an absolutely beautiful end to your day. Thanks all.